They said no one could survive that river, but I saw her standing in it, alive, like she didn't feel the cold at all. And that was only the beginning. When I saw the figure in white standing waist deep in the icy water, my vision blurred, because I understood this was no accident. I was trudging back from a lone hunt at the river's bend, cold creeping under the seams of my coat, when an otherworldly howl sliced through the winter dusk. It wasn't the ragged cry of a wounded animal, nor the call I'd learned to recognize in domestic dogs. It was something ancient, resonant, and far too deliberate to be mere wildlife. My rifle pressed against my shoulder felt suddenly absurd, as if I'd brought a toy to a storm. I paused at the tree line, breath steaming in ragged clouds. The howl came again, closer this time, echoing along the frozen banks like a summons. Heart hammering, I edged forward, boots crunching against the frost-hardened snow. The river lay half-frozen, shards of ice cracking under the current's slow insistence. And there, just beyond a jut of rock, I saw her. A girl, or a woman, swathed in a gown the color of fresh snow, standing motionless to her waist in the black water. Her hair, dark as oil, clung to her cheeks and neck. She barely moved, as if carved from the ice itself. Every instinct screamed at me, turn back, leave her to nature. Yet something in her posture, fragile but steadfast, drew me like a magnet. I waded in, the sting of freezing water biting through my trousers. My hands trembled as I reached for her shoulders. She sagged against me, weightless and limp. I dragged her toward the shore, each step a battle against the current and my own rising panic. When I finally hauled her onto the bank, snow crunched under our bodies. I crouched beside her, fumbling for a spare blanket from my pack. "What happened?" I whispered, voice cracking. "Who are you?" Her lips parted and she drew a ragged breath. Her eyes fluttered open, pupils dark as the river's depths. For a heartbeat, she stared right through me. Then, with a voice so soft I leaned in to hear, she murmured, "They will come. Don't be afraid," and slid back into unconsciousness. I wrapped her in the blanket, checking her pulse. It was faint but steady. My mind raced. City girl on a frozen river, hypothermia victim. But her words, her knowing tone, churned in my head. They will come. Who were they? I hoisted her onto my shoulder, careless of the rifle now slung inelegantly behind me. Every step toward my cabin was a blur of panic and awe. My heart thudded so loudly I thought she must hear it. Snow drifted down in thick flakes, coating her hair and the edges of the blanket. By the time I reached the cabin door, my fingers were numb, and my breath rattled in my chest. I fumbled with the lock, dragged her inside, and dropped her gently on the cold wooden floor. The fire pit in the center was nothing more than embers. I stamped them back to life, the room flickering with orange warmth. She shivered, and I pressed my coat tighter around her shoulders. I tore off my gloves, drenched them in vodka from my flask, and applied the harsh burn to her wrists to coax warmth into her veins. Her eyelashes fluttered again, a soft groan escaping her lips. I fetched water and a cloth, gently wiping the ice from her skin. Her breath came in shallow, misty puffs. Sitting across from her, I watched as frost melted from her lashes. My rifle leaned against the wall, forgotten. Outside, the wind moaned against the planks, but inside, time slowed. I dared to think I could fix this, warm her up, call for help. Maybe she'd say she'd slipped through thin ice. Logical explanations swirled in my head until she spoke again. "They will come," she repeated, eyes opening to meet mine. There was no fear in her gaze, only certainty. It chilled me deeper than any winter wind. I drew a sharp breath. Who will come? Help? Or, her lips curved in a brief, knowing smile, brother. And then her gaze drifted to the window, where the firelight danced across the glass. She tilted her head, listening to something I could not hear. I followed her eyes but saw only trees and swirling snow. A shiver ran down my spine as if someone or something stood just beyond the glass. My pulse thundered. The hairs on my neck bristled. I wanted to laugh, to shake off the dread, but the air itself felt heavier, charged. I knelt beside her, voice low. "You're safe here. I'll get help in the morning. Just rest." She didn't respond. Curled in the blanket, her chest rose and fell in a fragile rhythm. I paced the cabin, gathering logs for the fire, trying to still the turmoil in my mind. Every crackle of burning wood sounded like a warning. An hour passed. I checked on her again, still breathing, still unconscious. My eyes strayed to the slatted window. Each drift of snow looked like a silent figure in the gathering dark. I swallowed hard, heart in my throat. I turned back to her and whispered, "Sleep now. Tomorrow, I promise." But I didn't believe it. Something had begun tonight. Something that would not end with a trip to the medical post. Something deeper than hypothermia or a lost traveler. I thought that was where the story would stop. City girl, frozen river, heroic rescue. I was wrong. Nature had prepared a far darker, far more wondrous surprise. I didn't sleep. Her ragged breathing kept me on edge, and every creak of the cabin made me jerk upright. When morning light slipped through the window, I found her murmuring against the blanket, eyes half open, voice distant and urgent. "Anya, Luka, Seryoja," she whispered, name after name tumbling in a low chant. Each syllable felt like a summons, a thread pulling me toward something I couldn't see. I knelt at her side, heart tightening. "Who are they?" I asked quietly, brushing damp hair from her forehead. She only shook her head, stare blank, tugging the blanket tighter. By midday, the village was abuzz. Neighbors huddled in clusters, faces pale. Dogs, my neighbors' hounds and farm curs, had vanished overnight. No tracks in the snow, no whimpers in the kennels, just silence where barking once echoed. I stepped outside, calling my old sheepdog, but only the wind answered. A sense of wrongness settled in my chest, cold and insistent. That night, I felt it first, a presence. I stood at the window, peering into the gloom. The moon was a thin crescent, sky thick with clouds. Then I saw them, 9 shapes, motionless at the tree line. 9 pairs of eyes glowed, pale amber in the dark. My breath caught. I froze. They didn't snarl or shift. They simply watched. Not me, but her. My cabin, my sanctuary, felt penetrated by their silent vigil. I backed away, heart pounding, but they stayed. An old superstition whispered in my mind, before death or birth. I remembered Grandpa's words, spoken when wolves circled his sled. They come to guide the soul, or to herald something new. My skin pricked with dread and awe. I threw a log on the fire. Flames hissed, but I could still feel their gaze. I returned to the window. The wolves were closer now, heads lowered, ears pricked. They were waiting. Inside she stirred again, her eyes flicking toward the window. I grabbed her hand. "What is this?" I hissed. Her lips trembled into a half-smile. "Nedorochka, Matvey, Varya," she breathed. Then her voice sharpened, urgent. "They're lost. I must bring them home." My heart clenched. Saved her from the river. Now she's calling on ghosts, I thought, my rational mind rejecting this descent into madness. I looked back at the pack. They remained silent, as if understanding every word. Hours passed. I paced, torn between fear and fascination. I wanted to barricade the door, barricade my mind against whatever this was. But I couldn't ignore the pull, the whisper of something ancient in the howl of her voice. At the edge of the clearing, one wolf broke rank. He slunk forward, stealthy as smoke, until he stood before the cabin door. I watched through the frosted glass as he paused, then dropped something at my threshold. A dead hare, Its fur, mottled white and gray, lay at the step, perfectly placed as an offering. I stared. The wolf looked back at me, eyes unreadable. Then he vanished into the tree line, swallowed by darkness. I sank to the floor, the hairs on my arms rising. My breath hitched. I lifted the hare, turning it over in my arms as if expecting explanation. Its paws were neatly tucked, its throat cleanly snapped. No blood marred the snow. I knelt beside her. This came from them, I said, voice barely a whisper. She sat up, eyes bright with recognition. It's him, she murmured. My brother! A shiver raced up my spine. I wanted to laugh in disbelief, to wake from this fever dream, but she touched the hare's silken ear as though greeting a long-lost sibling. Her eyes filled with tears I couldn't tell if they were grief or relief. They waited for the offering, she said softly, voice breaking. They wanted to know I remember. I tried to steady my racing mind. Remember what? I asked, but she turned away, rocking slightly, as if listening to the rabbit's silent heartbeat. Outside, the forest was hushed. No wind stirred the branches. Even the fire seemed to hold its crackle in reverence. I pressed my face to the window again. No sign of the pack. It was as though they'd dissolved into the night, leaving only their gift. I sat beside her, holding the hare close to her chest. My thoughts tumbled. Hallucination, animal instinct, coincidence. Yet something in her eyes told me this was deeper, a communion between her and the wild. I wasn't sure where the boundary lay, between life and legend anymore. I only knew that I was no longer hunter and prey, rescuer and rescued. We were both participants in something greater, orchestrated by forces I could neither see nor fully grasp. I thought this chapter would close with the wolves' departure and the morning sun. I believed I would bundle her up and deliver her to help, then return to my solitary rounds along the river. But nature had prepared another surprise, one that would rewrite everything I thought I knew. She rose unsteadily, legs trembling like young saplings in a thawing breeze, and took her first steps away from the fire. Her gaze was distant, as if she were balancing between two worlds. I caught her arm to steady her, and she looked at me, her eyes soft, almost apologetic, yet filled with something I couldn't name. She spoke one word, home, and I nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. Outside, the wolves stirred. They had vanished at dawn, but now, as though summoned by an unspoken command, one by one they emerged from the tree line. Their silence was absolute. No growls, no prodding yips, just a quiet parade of gray shapes slipping through the snow. They fanned out around the clearing and settled into a ring, watching her with taut, expectant bodies. I realized, with a jolt, that I felt no fear. My pulse steadied, my breath slowed. The same wolves that had once sent a shiver through me now seemed protective, almost reverential. I stepped beside her, feeling more companion than hunter. She walked forward, each step surer than the last, and the wolves parted like a curtain to let her pass. I followed, heart pounding in awe. She never glanced behind, as if trusting them absolutely, as if they were her family. And in that moment, I understood she was no ordinary woman. Over the next 2 days, she recovered enough to walk without help. She barely spoke, but her silence was charged. Villagers who came to check on us left with haunted eyes. By night, they confessed dreams in hushed tones, dreams of the girl clad in white, standing in a circle of wolves under a silver moon. In their visions, she reached out to the beasts. They howled in unison, then vanished into mist. Some wept in their sleep, others woke trembling, certain they'd seen something divine. I heard their stories over tea and bread in the corner of the local tavern. Old Ilya, the blacksmith, claimed he dreamt the girl touched him on the forehead and whispered a name he'd never spoken. Maria, who keeps the schoolhouse, said she found scratch marks on her door at dawn, 9 thin lines curling like claws. One evening, I watched her through frost-laced glass as she stood just beyond the cabin, craning her neck toward the pines. The wolves gathered again, silent as sentinels. She let her arms fall to her sides and closed her eyes, lips moving in a wordless chant. A cold wind stirred, and I heard branches crack behind me. I turned and caught the old shaman, Baba Dunya, staring at the window with wide, fearful eyes. "Healer," she whispered, using the old tongue. "She walks between realms. Be careful." I nodded, though I barely understood. When I looked back, the wolves were retreating into the forest, but at her signal, a single wolf, the same one who'd left the hare, lingered. He padded forward, silent as snowfall, and pressed his thick head against her knee. She looked down, her face lighting with a smile of relief and recognition. "She's calling them home," I told Baba Dunya in a hushed tone, "and they obey." "She watches the wolves as family," the old woman replied, her voice quavering, "and she watches you as one who must bear witness." I felt that truth settle over me like the weight of fresh snow. In the firelight, I saw her face, serene and ancient. She turned to me then, eyes steady. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but clear. "For seeing." I swallowed hard, tears prickling in my eyes. "I should be the one thanking you," I managed. That night, under a sky littered with stars, she walked to the edge of the clearing. The wolves formed a procession behind her, tails low but wagging in what looked like ceremony. She paused, raised her hand in a delicate wave, and they slipped away into the forest, one by one, until only she and I remained. She looked back at me, silhouette framed by moonlight. "They cannot stay," she whispered, "but neither can I." I stepped forward, but she held up a hand. "This is where our paths part." Her voice cracked, and she looked toward the woods, as if listening for a final farewell. I wanted to ask her to stay, to explain, to become a part of this miracle, but the wolves were calling her name now, a chorus of low howls that felt like echoes from an ancient heart. She closed her eyes, pressed her hand to her chest, and took a slow breath. I watched her join the pack, melting into their folds of fur and shadow. The last thing I saw was her hair, white as driven snow, as she lifted her face to the moon. Then they were gone. I stood alone in the silent clearing, heart pounding with grief and wonder. She had looked at the wolves as family, and at me as someone who needed to see. And I saw, I felt it deep in my bones, that we are all part of something vast, something wiser than we know. The night held its breath for a long moment, before the wind sighed through the trees and carried the echoes of distant howls into the stillness. "I must go. Winter still holds," she said, voice steady but soft, as if she were confessing a truth older than the snow around us. I caught her hand before she could pull away, heart pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst through my ribs. "Please," I whispered, "stay until spring. You can't face the woods alone in this cold." Her fingers trembled against my cheek. She leaned in, and for an instant I felt the fragile warmth of her skin beneath my rough glove. Her breath was like frost on glass, cool, fleeting, yet impossible to ignore. The cabin's fire sputtered, shadows dancing across her face. Behind us, a low chorus of howls rose from the tree line. I froze, watching in awe as the wolves stepped forward, their bodies moving in perfect unison. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, noses tipped toward us, eyes bright with intelligence. It was as if they read every unspoken word between us. She placed her palm on my cheek, fingertips pressing lightly, and the wolves edged closer, tails low but wagging in a slow, solemn rhythm. Each breath I took felt sacred, each heartbeat echoing through the silent vigil. The air crackled with something ancient, something neither wholly wild nor entirely human. "I can't stay," she murmured against my lips. "If I remain past the eve of winter's end, I'll be bound to this place." I shook my head, disbelief twisting my stomach. "There has to be another way," I insisted. "You can't just vanish into the forest." She smiled, a sad curve that broke my heart. "You taught me kindness, Hunter. Now let me teach you faith." She gently brushed a lock of hair from my forehead, and in her eyes, I saw centuries of farewell. That night, I built the fire high, stacking logs until the flames roared and the cabin brimmed with light. But even the fiercest blaze couldn't thaw the chill in my soul. I watched her pack a small satchel, bread, dried fish, a coil of rope, and I fought the urge to wrest it from her hands. She paused, looking at me one last time. "Remember," she whispered, "they walk beside us always." Then she slipped outside. I followed, desperate, but stopped at the door as the wolves parted to let her pass. They formed two lines on either side of the narrow path, silent guardians in the moonlit snow. I reached out, voice nearly cracking. "Won't you come back?" She turned, her silhouette bathed in pale starlight. "If the forest calls, I must answer." Her final words drifted on the wind as she melted into the trees, and the wolves closed ranks behind her, their howls rising in unison like a benediction. I stood alone in the clearing, chest heaving, watching embers fade in the hearth. I thought the story had reached its end, that rescuing her from the river, sheltering her here, and witnessing miracles in the night had been enough. But the forest had woven a final twist I could never have foreseen. When dawn broke, she was gone. No footprints led away, no trace of her passage through the snow. Only the wolves remained, sitting in a silent ring around the cabin, heads bowed as though in mourning. I opened the door, stepping onto the porch, and the wolves watched me with those knowing eyes. One of them, the hairbringer, the pale-fanged witness to the miracle, rose and padded to my feet. He placed his head against my shins and looked up, as if urging me to follow. I hesitated, heart clenched by grief and wonder. The morning light painted his fur in shades of silver, and for a moment I thought I saw her reflection in his eyes. I knelt, stroking his neck. "Where did she go?" I whispered, voice thick. He lifted his snout to the wind, nostrils flaring, then turned toward the depths of the forest. He hadn't been a mere wolf. He had been her sentinel, her witness, her brother. My breath caught. Without thinking, I rose and followed him, each step crunching in the pristine snow. The pack moved like a river of gray and white, winding through birches and pines. Sunlight filtered through the branches, falling in pale beams that danced on the ground. I pressed on, driven by hope and dread both. After what felt like hours, we arrived at a frozen clearing. In the center stood a circle of ancient stones, half buried in ice. The wolves halted, forming a final barrier between the stones and the forest beyond. But at the heart of the circle, I saw her. She knelt on the ice, hands outstretched, face lifted to the sky. Her gown was gone, replaced by a cloak of woven branches and moss that glimmered with frost. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, yet radiating a power that made my chest ache. When she spoke, her voice carried on the wind. "Thank you, Hunter, for believing when you had every reason to doubt." Tears burned my eyes. "Please," I choked out, "take me with you." She shook her head, sorrow softening her smile. "You have your path among people. Mine lies with the wolves." A sudden gust of wind whipped around us, swirling snow into a blinding flurry. The wolves vanished into the storm, leaving only her silhouette framed by the ancient stones. She rose, step by step dissolving into the haze, until she was nothing but a memory in the cold air. The storm passed as quickly as it came. I stood alone on the ice, heart heavy, breath crystallizing before me. The stones behind me were still, but the world felt forever changed. I lowered my head, fingers brushing the frost-bitten ground. I thought I had saved her. Instead, she saved me from disbelief, from loneliness, from forgetting the old magic. I understood then that some meetings don't end, they transform. And though she was gone, I carried her story in every thump of my heart, in every howl that drifted on the winter wind. I rose before dawn, snow crunching under my boots as I plunged into the forest. My heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread, hope that I might find her trail, dread that I'd find nothing but empty silence. For nights I'd searched, following footprints too slender and erratic to be human, yet too deliberate to belong to any wild creature I knew. And then, last night, the tracks had ended at the riverbank, only wolf prints in the powdery snow disappearing into the rushing water. My breath misted in the frigid air as I crouched at the water's edge, scanning the opposite bank for some sign of her. Icicles hung from overhanging branches. The river's current snarled around hidden ice floes. I bent to scoop a handful of snow, watching it drift away in the current, as if carrying my desperation downstream. That's when I saw him, the leader. He emerged from the mist like a spirit, massive shoulders rippling beneath his winter coat of fur. His stride was confident, unhurried, as though he owned this place. I froze, every muscle taut. Our eyes met across the water, golden, ancient, fathomless. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The forest held its breath. I felt my pulse echo through my ears. In that silent exchange, I sensed every ounce of his intelligence and his sorrow. He dipped his head once, a solemn greeting more profound than any bark or howl. Tentatively, I stepped closer to the bank. He didn't budge. The only sound was the river's pulse. I knelt, as if in supplication, and whispered, "Where is she?" The air crackled with my unspoken question. He took another step forward, paw meeting paw, snow spraying like cold sparks. He stopped just several feet away, close enough that I could see the frost in his whiskers. He lowered himself onto his haunches, head level with mine. Then, with measured grace, he laid his heavy muzzle on my knee. A surge of emotion hit me, grief, gratitude, wonder, all tangled together until I couldn't breathe. His eyes, bright and wet, held a flicker of what felt like regret, but also a fierce, steadfast love. I reached out with trembling fingers to stroke the fur beneath his jaw. It was coarse, warm, alive. Tears stung my eyes. "Tell me," I murmured, voice cracking, "that she's safe." My words dissolved in the stillness. He closed his eyes, sighing. A soft exhalation that rumbled through his chest as if carrying the weight of the entire forest. A single tear froze on his cheek, shimmering in the pale light. I swallowed hard, pressing my palm against his fur, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. In that moment, I understood. She had never been lost. She was one with this wild family, bound to them by something older than language, by blood, by spirit. He lifted his head, meeting my gaze once more. I saw in him the echo of her eyes, fierce loyalty, ancient wisdom, and the tender sorrow of parting. His ears twitched toward the upstream current, as though listening for her song. And then, as gently as he had come, he rose. He took a step back, turned, and disappeared into the mist-shrouded trees. I remained kneeling on the bank long after he was gone, hand pressed to my heart. My rifle lay forgotten at my side. The forest seemed to exhale around me, branches settling, birds timidly singing their first notes of mourning. The river flowed on, unconcerned with our small dramas. I stood and brushed snow from my coat, every step feeling weightless, as though I carried a blessing given by the wild itself. The truth had been revealed. She existed beyond the boundaries of my world, a creature woven from frost and moonlight, belonging to the wolves she called family. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we share the truth, what you can't explain, but must feel. I made my way back to the path leading home, the forest's hush following me like a benediction. I knew I would never forget the look in that wolf's eyes, the press of his muzzle against me, or the knowledge that nature remembers every soul it touches. If you also believe in a special bond with animals, type, "We are not alone in this world." She was rushing to a job interview and ended up in the forest, holding a bleeding wolf pup in her arms. Nothing in her life could have prepared her for what nature did next. When I saw his eyes in the headlights, my breath caught, because I realized he was looking straight into my soul. I'd woken before dawn, heart hammering at the thought of the interview. My palms were slick on the wheel as I drove out of the city, the sky still bruised with night. I kept glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror, pinched lips, eyes wide, hair tucked behind my ears. Today was everything. A chance to change my life, a chance to prove I wasn't just another face in a crowd. The road narrowed as I left the highway, the streetlights thinning until only the thin glow of my own headlights cut through the haze. Fog curled around the asphalt like ghosts. My car's engine thrummed, a lonely heartbeat in the still air. I swallowed hard, willing my nerves to settle. In a few minutes, I'd be sitting across the table from the hiring manager, answering every question perfectly. I imagined her nodding, impressed. I imagined signing the offer letter. I imagined the relief, the pride. That vision shattered when something dark burst into view. There, in the middle of the road, a silhouette flickered, long muzzle, pointed ears, a lean shape. My foot slammed the brake. Tires screeched. For an instant, I thought I'd clear him. Then the thud rattled through the car like a gunshot. The world tilted. I threw the car into park and stumbled out, heart hammering so loud I could almost hear it. The fog swallowed my breath as I raced forward. I expected to find a broken body. I expected to see stillness. Instead, I saw two golden eyes shining at me, unblinking. He was sprawled half on the pavement, half in the verge, ribs rising and falling in shallow gasps. My knees hit the ground before I even noticed. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a sob. "Oh God, oh God," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign in the thick air. I knelt beside him, every instinct screaming to flee, but I couldn't move. The world narrowed to that moment, mine and his. I reached out, fingertips trembling, and traced the line of his muzzle. He didn't flinch. His ears twitched, but he held my gaze, fierce and calm and utterly fearless. I wanted to turn away, to run back to my car and peel out of there, to never look back. But something held me in place. His eyes, deep as midnight pools, and in them a question, a plea, a challenge. Pain lanced through me, sharp as ice. "I'm so sorry," I gasped. "I didn't see you." My voice cracked. I glanced at the dent in my bumper, at the blood marring his silver fur. Guilt coiled around my ribs. I should have been more careful. I should have slowed down. Now this creature, this wild, beautiful soul, was hurt because of me. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. The screen blinked useless in my hand. I pressed it flat against the wolf's flank. "Hold on," I murmured. "Just hang on." My voice wavered between fear and awe. Fear that he would die here alone. Awe that he trusted me enough to look at me like this, as if I were nothing less than a friend. I remembered a first aid video I'd watched years ago. I pressed my jacket under his bleeding side, trying to stem the flow. My fingers grew slick with warm wetness, and I tasted metal on my tongue. The fog thickened, the silence pressing in. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was in over my head. But every time I looked at him, I felt a curious calm, as if he was teaching me something about courage, about mercy. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell. My watch had long since stopped. Somewhere behind me, my car's hazard lights blinked red, a lonely beacon. I blinked, and he opened his mouth in a soft sound, a groan or a murmur, I could not tell. He shifted and lifted his head higher, as though gathering strength. My chest tightened. Had I made him worse? "Stay," I whispered, voice trembling. "Please." Then it happened. He rose on trembling legs, each movement deliberate and controlled. He didn't knock me to the ground. He didn't lunge. He stood, back arched, head high. For a heartbeat, he looked more like a phantom than an animal, an ancient spirit calling me to witness something beyond understanding. My breath caught again. My heart thundered. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, part grief, part wonder. He took a single step toward me. I froze, every instinct frozen in awe. The world grew impossibly quiet, as though all creation had paused to watch this moment. He pressed his warm, wounded side against my knee. My hand slid up his flank, and I felt the steady beat of life beneath the fur. I felt his gratitude, raw and profound. I felt his understanding. In that instant, the interview, my plans, my ambitions, all of it fell away. Nothing mattered except this living miracle at my feet. A car honked somewhere down the road, distant and indifferent. The fog shifted, revealing the dark trees beyond. I swallowed hard, attempting to reclaim my senses. "I'll get help," I said, voice brittle. "I promise." He watched me, golden eyes unwavering. Then, as if making a choice, he settled back onto the ground, head resting on his paws. He was tired, wounded, but he was alive. He was here, and he had chosen to stay with me. I thought he'd run away. I thought he'd vanish into the mist. But he stayed, and that was when the impossible began. I slid back into the driver's seat, heart pounding, and hauled my jacket off the wolf's frozen body. He lay half on the pavement, half in the shoulder, staring up at me. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a small victory. For a moment, I thought, I can't do this. I'm not a rescuer. I'm not an animal expert. But then his golden eyes met mine again, and something inside me shifted. I could not leave him here to die. He shifted, groaning softly, and began to drag himself forward, one heavy foreleg, then the other. His movement was agonizingly slow, but he was coming toward me. Panic fluttered in my chest. If I let him follow, he'd bleed out on the roadside. If I left him, he'd die alone. "No," I whispered, reaching for the rear door. I pressed my shoulder against the frame and pried it open. I debated for a fraction of a second whether this was insane, but when he lifted his head and watched me with that unspoken plea, I made my choice. With effort, I eased him into the back seat, folding the passenger seat forward to create space. He slid in as if trusting me completely, an unspoken pact between predator and stranger. I knelt beside him, pressing my jacket against the wound. His fur was slick with blood, but his eyes remained clear and focused. I could feel his trembling, but he did not struggle. Instead, he leaned into my hand, as though drawing strength from my presence. My hands shook as I closed the door. I climbed in beside him, slamming my own door and pulling my seatbelt across. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life, startling both of us. My foot hovered over the brake for one breathless moment before I shifted into drive. The road back toward town stretched ahead, slick and winding. The whole way, I fought a torrent of conflicting emotions: horror that I had hit him in the first place, guilt for dragging him around in my car, fear that I would crash again if I lost focus, compassion that pressed like a weight on my chest, and beneath it all, a strange spark of awe that this wild creature was allowing me to transport him. Why? What did he want from me? I kept my voice low, talking to him as if he could understand. "I'm getting you help. A vet's open 20 miles down. Hold on, okay?" I reached toward his head, stroking his fur. He turned it slightly, resting his cheek against my palm. His eyes closed for a heartbeat, then opened, burning bright. I swallowed hard, a lump in my throat. "Why are you doing this?" My question hung in the air, half to him, half to myself. At a bend in the road, a pair of headlights flickered around the curve. I dipped my lights, and the vehicle slowed behind me, then passed. I felt exposed, as if everyone could see the wounded wolf in my back seat, could hear the rasp of his breathing, but I pressed on, unable to stop, unable to look back. My mind raced. What if I can't save him? What if he dies in my car? What if I'm arrested for harboring a wild animal? The knot in my stomach tightened. I glanced at him again. He was still. His side rose with each breath. I reached to close the window, afraid the wind would chill him. As I did, I noticed something unexpected. A flicker of something in his eyes. Not pain, not fear, but purpose. It was as if he was not worried about himself, as if he'd trusted me with something bigger. In that moment, I realized this rescue wasn't just about saving him. He wasn't pleading for his own life. He was entrusting me with something, leading me somewhere I could save another, or bear witness to something I could never imagine. His gaze burned into me with that unspoken conviction. "Trust me. Keep going." I swallowed, blinking back tears. My hands closed around the wheel, knuckles white. I felt both terrified and uplifted, terrified by the unknown path ahead, uplifted by the weight of his trust. The world outside was still the same fog-shrouded road, indifferent trees, damp asphalt, but inside the car, time had warped. It was just him, me, and the promise in his eyes. I found the veterinarian's sign, neon red against the pre-dawn gloom. A little clinic perched at the edge of a small town. Relief wove through me like warmth. I slowed, pulled into the lot, and killed the engine. The wolf shifted slightly, his head falling back on the seat. I killed the engine again, just to be sure he felt the stillness. I opened the door and slid out, looped my arm under his chest, and lifted him as best I could. His weight was nothing compared to what I felt in that moment. Responsibility and awe, fear and wonder, a knot of emotions that threatened to break me open. With every step, I felt more certain. This was only the beginning of something impossible. As we crossed the clinic's threshold, I took a final breath and whispered, "We're in this together." He didn't answer, of course, only exhaled a soft, ragged breath, but I felt him nod. In his eyes, I saw it again, the unshakable belief that he was leading me somewhere beyond my wildest dreams. And I followed, ready or not, into the next chapter of this unbelievable story. When the clinic door swung open, I half expected a flurry of activity, voices, the hum of machinery, the sterile scent of antiseptic. Instead, an empty hallway greeted me, flickering lights overhead casting long shadows against the tile. I called out, voice trembling, "Please, someone," but only silence answered. Moments later, a man in scrubs appeared at the far end, clipboard in hand. His expression froze when he saw the wolf draped limply in my arms. "What in God's name are you doing?" he demanded, striding toward me. The clip-clop of his shoes on the floor echoed like judgment. "This wolf, he's injured. I hit him on the road," I stammered, voice cracking. "Please." He held up a hand. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't treat wild animals here. We're a domestic clinic. You need wildlife rescue, not me." His tone was polite but ironclad, as if reciting a law rather than choosing to turn us away. I felt my chest tighten. "But he's bleeding. He needs help." Tears sprang unbidden. "Please, I can pay." He shook his head. It's illegal to harbor a wild animal without proper permit. I can't risk liability." He backed away, clipboard pressed against his chest. "You'll have to take him elsewhere." "I'm sorry." The word hung between us like a verdict. I glanced at my watch. Nearly dawn. No wildlife refuge in this town, and the next hour's away. My mind spun. Leave him to die or stay with him alone. Desperation twisted in my gut. "Stay with me," I whispered, more to myself than to the vet. He gave me a pitying look, then disappeared into the back. I sank onto the dusty floor of the empty lobby, the wolf's weight heavy in my arms. His bloody side pressed against my forearm, warm in the cool morning air. Outside, the sky was turning pale pink, another sunrise indifferent to our plight. I rocked him gently, murmuring, "I'm here. I won't leave you." Minutes passed that felt like hours. The quiet pressed in so close I could hear my own heartbeat, and his, shallow but steady. I hadn't felt this alone in years. Even when I lived alone, my apartment had screens, voices, the hum of air conditioning. Here, in this dead clinic, only the wolf and me existed. When the doors locked behind the veterinarian's departing footsteps, the last sliver of hope flickered out. I stood and carried him through the back door into a small, overgrown courtyard. Tangled grass, broken tiles, weeds pushing through the cracks. It was a forgotten space, a no-man's land between the clinic and the woods. Moonlight filtered through broken slats in the fence, dancing across the wolf's body as I laid him down on a weathered tarp. The cold grass bit through my jeans as I sat beside him. My knees ached from cradling him, but I dared not move. I brushed stray hairs from his muzzle and whispered, "Why won't you just rest?" The silence answered. No buzzing neon, no cars passing, only the distant call of waking birds and my ragged breaths. I stared at the sky, ink dark, streaked with violet, and felt a hollow ache. My interview, my plans, seemed obscene now, a meaningless trinket compared to life and death on this cold ground. I wondered how I'd explain this to anyone. Most would think I was insane, but I wasn't going to abandon him. Not here, not ever. Time slipped by. My eyelids grew heavy, and I rested my head against his flank, dozing fitfully. Every rustle in the brush made me start. Every distant scream of an owl edged my blood pressure higher. Fear and sorrow warred with awe in my chest. What had I done to deserve this encounter? How had my morning become a crucible of raw, fragile life? Then, without warning, his body shifted beneath me. I blinked awake to see him rising, back arching, legs unsteady but determined. He stood, swaying like a sapling in strong wind, head lowering in a hesitant bow. My breath caught. He was standing on his own, bleeding, exhausted, and he was standing. My pulse hammered as he took another step forward, front paw lifting. I braced myself, waiting for him to collapse, to give up. But instead, he marched toward me, each movement deliberate. When he was close enough, he extended his wounded leg, touching my knee with a gentle pressure that sent a shock through my whole body. The contact was feather-light, but it grounded me, rooting me to this impossible moment. "To thank you," I choked out, voice barely a whisper. I reached to cradle his paw, feeling the coarse pads against my palm. Tears brimmed in my eyes again, fear, gratitude, reverence all mingled into one. He wasn't just surviving for himself, he was propelling me forward, urging me to follow. For a heartbeat, I thought he would lie back down, his strength spent. But he remained upright, eyes locked on mine, unyielding and clear. I felt something shift deep within me, an unspoken vow to honor this gift, the gift of trust and the gift of wonder. I took a stumbling step forward, gathering the strength to stand myself. He moved with me, guiding me toward the fence that led back to the woods. My heart pounded, a wild, chaotic rhythm. Part of me screamed that I was going mad, that no sane person would follow a wounded wolf into darkness, but part of me, The part he spoke to pulled me onward. I reached the fence and paused, fingers brushing the rough wood. He looked back at me, eyes bright with unshed tears I couldn't place. Then he turned and slipped between the boards into the forest's edge, pausing just long enough for me to see the silhouette of his lowered tail, an unspoken invitation. I thought he was simply saying goodbye, but nature had a different plan. He slipped away from the clearing, each step slow as if he weighed 100 pounds. I watched his silver flank fade into the shadows, and my heart clenched. I didn't know what to do. I thought my part was over. I believed he would vanish into the darkness, and that would be that. But when he paused and turned to look back, eyes glinting in the moonlight, I realized the story wasn't finished. I pushed myself to my feet, breath quick and ragged, and followed. The grass was damp under my shoes, cold dew soaking through my jeans. Fear prickled at my skin. I had no idea where I was going. I had no map, no plan, yet I couldn't stop. Every instinct screamed to run, but I pressed on, one foot in front of the other. The forest loomed around me, ancient trees rising like silent sentinels. The trunks were thick and gnarled, roots snaking across the ground. Shadows shifted with every rustle of wind. My pulse hammered as I crept forward, careful not to trip on a hidden root. My flashlight had died. I clutched my phone against my chest, its pale screen useless. Only the wolf's silhouette guided me, his form flickering between moonlit gaps. He led me deeper, where the air smelled of earth and pine. My mind raced. What awaited me here? A trap? A den? I stifled a sob. I was no adventurer. I was a terrified woman in a stranger's coat. But each time I glanced back, he stood still and watched. His eyes held that same message. Follow. We reached an ancient oak, its trunk wider than my arms could wrap. Its roots formed a tangled web at its base, half buried in the soil. The wolf crouched, nose to the ground, ears pricked. Then he stepped aside. I bent to peer between the roots and froze. There, caught in an old metal spring, lay a small pup. Its fur was a dull gray, eyes squeezed shut in pain. The trap had clamped around its front leg, dragging the other side of its body against the rough bark. It whimpered with each shallow breath. My stomach turned. The wolf wasn't leading me for himself. He was crying out for this child. I dropped to my knees. My hands trembled as I reached for the trap. The metal was cold, unforgiving. My fingers slipped on the jagged edges. "Don't be afraid," I whispered to the pup, though I wasn't sure if it could hear. "I'm here!" The mother wolf pressed her muzzle against my shoulder, a soft woof of encouragement. I felt her breath, warm and damp. I closed my eyes for a second, willing myself to calm down. I imagined the trap releasing, the pup running free. My pulse slowed a fraction. I pressed the leverage bar of my phone against the spring, working inch by inch to loosen it. The snapped metal rang through the forest like a bell. A final snap, and the trap flew open. The pup yelped, scrambling backward, body quivering. I reached out and cradled him, brushing fur away from the wound. It was bleeding. I wrapped my scarf gently around his leg, knotting it tight enough to slow the flow. My cheeks burned with tears, gratitude, horror, awe. "He didn't ask for help," I choked out, voice thick. "He asked me to save another." The wolf watched, muscles rippling, eyes shining with something I'd never seen in a wild creature. Relief. He nudged the pup toward me, then stepped back, giving us space. I held them both, the mother and the child. The forest felt alive around us, as if every creature was holding its breath. My tears fell onto the pup's fur. I smelled pine and earth and something more, hope. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder of the world I'd left behind. But here, in this moonlit grove, time had no meaning. The wolf pressed his forehead to mine, a gesture so intimate it cracked something open inside me. My sobs came unbidden. I wept for the pup. I wept for the wolf. I wept for the miracle of being chosen. I thought the night could not become more extraordinary. I believed my heart could not swell any further, but nature had more in store. I pried the trap open with trembling fingers and lifted the tiny body of the pup into my arms. His leg was slick with blood, but the moment he was free, he yipped and curled against my chest, as if relieved to be held. I wrapped him in my scarf, a soft, warm cocoon against the cold earth, and felt the rush of triumph, quickly followed by a wave of shame so fierce it stole my breath. All day, I'd lived for a job interview, new shoes, crisp resume, rehearsed answers. And now here I was, cradling a wounded wild creature in a dark grove, while my important life plans felt like dust. I pressed my face into the pup's fur and admitted to myself, I'm so sorry I cared more about my career than this family's survival. I stood, the pup heavy in my arms, and glanced at the mother wolf beside me. She watched intently, a silent sentinel in the moonlight. My heart hammered at the thought. What was I doing, this close to a wild animal and her child? Danger lurked in every shadow. I stepped backward, nearly stumbling over a root, and the wolf padded after me, her presence both comforting and terrifying. I thought we were finished, that my task was merely to free her pup, but nature had other plans. The forest seemed to lean in, expectant, alive with the soft chorus of night creatures. The pup whimpered in my arms, hungry, scared, trusting me completely. I wrapped him tighter in the blanket, tears stinging my eyes. I don't know how to save you, I whispered, voice cracking. I don't even know how to save myself. My shame burned hotter than the night air. I'd spent years chasing promotions and climbing ladders, convinced that's what mattered. Now, here in this grove, I realized that those ambitions were hollow compared to the pulse of real life beneath my fingers. My breaths came in ragged sobs as the wolf watched, her head low, eyes steady. Then, from the edge of the clearing, another shape emerged. My breath caught. At first I thought the shadows played tricks, but no, there she was, the pup's mother, larger and stronger, stepping forward through the underbrush. My chest tightened so much I feared I'd suffocate. Oh God, I whispered, pressing the pup closer. Don't let her see me as a threat. The wolf mother halted just outside the ring of moonlight. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just watched, silent and still, her gaze shifting between me and her pup. My heart pounded in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Fear and wonder tangled in my chest. Suddenly, the mother took a few careful steps forward. My breath froze. She stopped right beside me, her body towering over my crouched form. My mind raced. This could end in tragedy. This could end with me bleeding. Or worse. Every survival instinct screamed to back away, to drop the pup and bolt. But the pup's soft whimper held me in place. Then she did something I never expected. With deliberate gentleness, she lowered her head and licked the pup's injured paw, right there in my arms. Her tongue was warm and rough against the wound. My breath hitched. I realized she trusted me enough to let me hold her baby while she tended him. My tears spilled over, hot and sudden. I wept for the pup's pain, for the wolf's trust, for my own stunned heart. I couldn't speak. I could only cradle the pup, feeling his ragged breaths, feeling the mother's presence like a thread weaving us together. The forest held its breath with us. In that moment, I felt every ambition I'd ever chased dissolve into something more essential. The bond between living beings, fragile yet unbreakable. She finished licking the pup, then lifted her head and gazed into my eyes. There was no anger, no reproach, only quiet acknowledgement. A fellowship born of shared struggle. My tears blurred my vision, but I stood taller under her gaze, as if she'd passed something ancient and luminous directly into my soul. I wrapped the pup tighter in my scarf, and the mother nudged us both with her muzzle, guiding me back toward the path. I followed, every step weighted with new purpose. I didn't know where we were going or what would come next, but I no longer felt alone. I thought I was just a woman on her way to a job interview. Instead, I'd become the keeper of a miracle no office could contain. As we moved through the trees, I whispered, "Thank you." Not just for saving this little life, but for opening my eyes to what matters most. They vanished into the trees as silently as they'd appeared. Mother, pup, and the lone wolf who had led me here. 3 shadows slipping between ancient trunks. My legs trembled, rooted to the leaf-strewn ground. I watched until the last flash of silver fur disappeared into the dark. Then I realized I was utterly alone. The forest was impossibly still. No rustle of leaves, no distant hoot of an owl, only my ragged breathing and the soft drum of my heart. The moonlight slanted through the branches, painting ghostly shapes on the forest floor. My hands still gripped the scarf where I'd wrapped the pup. It lay empty and still in my arms, as if it had never been. I sank to my knees, the cold earth seeping through my jeans. I pressed my palms into the damp soil and closed my eyes, trying to anchor myself in reality. Was it real? Had I really freed a trapped pup and watched its family vanish into the night? Had I really held a wild creature in my arms and felt its mother's tongue on its wound? Tears slid down my cheeks, hot and unbidden. I wiped them on my sleeve, trembling. The forest seemed to breathe around me, waiting, alive, wise. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Slowly, I rose, brushing leaves from my hair. My boots crunched on twigs as I made my way back toward the parking area. The path was faint, half hidden beneath years of fallen needles. I followed the curve of the trail, relying on memory and the faint glow of the moon. Every step felt surreal, as though I were sleepwalking through someone else's dream. When I emerged onto the dirt road, my car's headlights waited, dim and indifferent. I closed my eyes against their glare and pressed my hands to my temples. The engine was cold, the interior smelling of pine and dust. I slumped behind the wheel and exhaled, feeling the weight of everything pressing down: relief, grief, wonder. I stared at the dashboard, at the GPS blinking my destination: interview in 10 minutes, 10 minutes that no longer held any meaning. My heart felt too full for ambition, too raw for small talk and rehearsed answers. I thought of the mat of earth where the pup had trembled, of the mother's steady gaze. I thought of how fragile and how fierce life could be. Without understanding why, I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. I backed out of the lot and onto the road, headlights cutting through the mist. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind drifted, replaying every detail of the night. The way the lone wolf had touched my knee, the soft whine of the trapped pup, the tender lick of its mother. I drove home as though in a trance. Town lights appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. The houses looked the same, but I felt like a stranger returning to a former life. My street came into view, sleepy and silent. I parked in my driveway, sat for a long moment, and turned off the engine. Inside my house, everything was unchanged. The piled mail on the table, the coffee mug in the sink, the neatly folded dress I'd chosen for the interview lay on my bed. I stared at it and realized I could never wear it again. My priorities had shifted beyond my control. I crept through the dark hallway, barefoot on cold wood floors. I slipped into my bedroom and shut the door. The dress stared back at me, crisp and pristine, a relic of who I had been that morning. I let the weight of the night settle in my chest. My breath caught as I whispered to the empty room, "I can't go." I pulled the blanket over my shoulders and curled into a ball on my bed. Sleep eluded me, replaced by images of golden eyes and trembling paws. I felt the pulse of the forest under my skin, the echo of primal trust. Hours passed in silent communion with my own racing thoughts. Then, as dawn's pale light brushed my curtains, I felt a tug deep in my bones, an invisible thread pulling me back toward the woods. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder of my interview, scheduled for 8:30. I reached for it, heart pounding, and stared at the screen. I closed my eyes and remembered the forest's hush, the wolf's steady gaze. I remembered the pup's trusting whimper. I realized that my life's direction had changed forever under the canopy of ancient trees. I no longer needed a corner office. I needed to follow that thread. I thought it was over, that I'd done enough, felt enough, been changed enough. I thought my story ended with the wolves disappearing into the night. But at first light on this impossible morning, I knew I had to go back. Something was calling me, deeper than fear or reason, into a world I'd only just glimpsed. I thought it was the end. But at dawn, I drove back, because I had to see it through. When I turned off the engine at the edge of the forest, dawn was just a pale promise on the horizon. My fingers shook as I opened the door and stepped onto the dew-slick ground, the damp earth smelling of moss and possibility. I gripped the scarf, still stained with mud and flecks of blood, from the back seat and slung it around my neck like a talisman. I'd never felt so alive, or so unmoored. The trees loomed, silent sentinels watching me. I swallowed hard, steeling myself. The path I had staggered through the night before was gone under fresh light. No broken branches, no footprints, no sign of wolf or pup. My heart thudded in my ribs as I scanned the undergrowth. I remembered the gnarled oak, its roots like monstrous veins. I remembered cradling that trembling pup beneath its canopy. But here, in the unblinking dawn, there was only forest floor, undisturbed, unmarked, eternal. I followed where I thought the path had led, stepping carefully between ferns and saplings. My boots sank into soft moss, my eyes darted to every shadow, every rock, as if the ground itself might betray a clue, but nothing shifted. No rustle of small paws, no low growl, no imprint in the mud, only birdsong, bright and blithe, mocking my search. I climbed a low rise, chest tight, and peered back down. The road I had driven in on was barely visible through the trees, a thin gray ribbon. I forced myself onward, deeper. My mind raced. Had I led the wolves here? Had I imagined the whole night? My pulse hammered. Doubt coiled around my thoughts like a serpent. At last, I reached the spot where I was sure the oak had stood. I pressed my hand to the ground, feeling the cool dampness seep into my palm. I closed my eyes, picturing its massive trunk, its shelter-shaped roots. But when I opened them again, all I saw was a gentle incline, soft with new growth, no gnarled bark, no twisted roots, nothing to mark where a miracle had unfolded. Panic squeezed my chest. I scrambled forward, pushing aside low branches, searching for any sign. An uprooted stump, a shallow hole, a tuft of silver fur. My breaths came in ragged gasps. I thought, this is a dream. It must be. A fevered hallucination born of adrenaline and guilt. Yet the scarf around my neck remained damp and heavy. The back seat of my car still held the muddy blanket I'd wrapped around the pup. Why was that there? Why was there dried blood on my palm when I wiped it earlier? If this was a dream, why did my heart still ache from his trusting eyes? I pressed my forehead against a tree's smooth bark and closed my eyes. My pulse slowed in the silence. Memory flooded back. His warm body weighted in my arms, the mother's tongue on his wound, the 3 wolves slipping into the darkness. My tears fell onto the bark, each drop a testament. This had happened. It had to have happened. I backed away and tried to retrace my steps from the night before. The curve of the trail, the way the moonlight hit a mossy log, the broken bit of fence that led into the clearing. But in daylight, those markers vanished into any number of similar shapes. Panic bled into despair. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the soft earth, mind spinning. I looked at my hands, still stained faintly with mud and something darker. My fingers trembled as I flexed them. I pressed my scarf tighter to my throat. If this was a dream, I whispered to the dawn, voice cracking. Then, why is there a dirty blanket in my car? Why is there blood on me? My words seemed to echo back from the trees. A breeze stirred the leaves, and for a moment, I thought I heard a soft whine. I froze, head whipping around. The forest held its breath. My heart thundered. But when the breeze died, there was only the brush of leaves, no flash of silver, no echo of pause. I stood, knees rubbery, and pressed onward up the slope. The incline grew steeper than I remembered, almost vertical, roots exposed like ribs. I tried to climb, but my foot slipped in the damp soil and I slid back down, mud splattering my jeans. My palms scraped against roots, splintering them. The pain was sharp and real. A dream would not bruise my hands like this. Defeat crashed over me. I slid to the bottom, chest heaving. All at once, the forest seemed too vast, too ancient for one woman to conquer. Doubt roared that I had invented every moment, every miracle. My shoulders shook with sobs I could no longer hold in. The dawn light sharpened, birds swooped through shafts of sun, and I wept for what I had lost, my certainty, my plans, my safe, predictable life. But even in that desolation, something lingered, a stirring of faith born of midnight miracles. I clenched the scarf in my fist and stood. My body was bruised, my confidence shattered, but my spirit still burned. I had seen the impossible. I had held it. And though nature had hidden its secrets by daylight, I knew I would return. I would search every root and gnarled trunk until I found that clearing again. For now, I walked back to my car, every step heavy with longing and resolve. I didn't yet know what I'd do when I found it, or if I would find it at all. But I knew one thing. I could not leave this story half told. I could not abandon the truth of what I had witnessed. If it was a dream, then it was the most vivid dream of my life, and I intended to chase it to its end. When the sun rose that morning, I felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. The soil beneath my feet seemed to hum with the memory of what had unfolded in those dark woods. I sat at my kitchen table, resume spread before me like a discarded relic, coffee gone cold. My phone buzzed with a reminder, interview in 30 minutes. But I no longer belonged to that ticking clock or to any boardroom where measured words and practiced smiles reigned supreme. The woman I had been that morning, chasing a promotion, was gone. In her place stood someone reshaped by a brush with raw, untamed life. I slid the resume into a drawer and closed it with finality. My fingers lingered on the wood, feeling its grain, and I whispered to myself, I can't go back. My heart thrummed with an urgency that had nothing to do with incentives or titles. It had everything to do with the pulse of a living creature who had taught me more in one night than any corporate mentor ever could. By mid-morning, I found myself at a small animal shelter on the outskirts of town. It was hardly glamorous, peeling paint on the walls, kennels stacked in rows, the hollow echo of barking dogs and mewing cats, but I walked through the doors as if crossing into sacred ground. Here, the rawness of life was on display every day, injury, fear, hope, healing. I signed in as a volunteer, my hands clammy with anticipation. A kindly woman at the front desk handed me a smock and a name tag, Leah, volunteer. It felt like the first true identity I'd ever assumed. I spent the day washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and cleaning cages. I fed kittens recovering from illness, their frail bodies trembling under my gentle touch. I coaxed an injured hawk into a new perch, speaking soft reassurances as though it might understand. Every creature I tended reminded me of that night in the forest. The wolf's golden gaze, the pup's trembling whimpers, the mother's tender lick. I carried those memories like embers in my chest, warming me from the inside out. No one asked why I was there, and I didn't offer explanations. I feared they would think me mad, chasing ghosts in a dark wood, cradling wild animals instead of seizing a corporate ladder. So I kept my story to myself, a secret I guarded fiercely. Yet with each life I touched, I felt a quiet communion, an unspoken bond that transcended words. When evening fell, I locked up the shelter and stepped into the cool dusk. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I walked to my car. The world was dimming, the sky turning that bruised purple that comes before full night. I paused, staring at the horizon, and felt a familiar tug in my chest, an invisible thread pulling me back to where it all began. I didn't follow it that night. Instead, I drove home and crawled into bed, exhausted but alive with purpose. Sleep came fitfully, and I awoke to the first hint of dawn catching the edges of my curtains. My dreams had been restless. Snatches of silver fur, soft whines, a single golden eye watching me from the shadows. At breakfast, I found a photograph tucked beneath my cereal bowl, a snap from my car's dashcam, taken the morning I hit the wolf. In it, I sat slumped at the wheel, terror and regret etched on my face. But off to the side, barely visible in the fog, was the faint outline of 4 shapes, wolves standing among the trees, as though guarding me. I held the photo in trembling hands, tears pricking my eyes. I knew then that I would never forget. All day, I carried the photo with me. I showed it to no one, yet I felt its truth resonating in my soul. I was part of something larger, a web of life that pulsed beneath the mundane rhythms of human schedules. It was not vengeance that guided the wild, but an invitation, a call to witness and to respond. That night, after locking up the shelter, I stepped outside into the starry stillness. The air was cold, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I stood in the parking lot, the world hushed around me, and closed my eyes. I listened for the sound of paws on the forest floor, for the whisper of movement beyond the trees. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then I felt it. A presence, gentle but insistent, like a heartbeat at the edge of my awareness. I opened my eyes and peered into the gathering darkness. There, just beyond the perimeter of light, 2 golden eyes glinted at me. My breath caught. My pulse thundered in my throat. The form of the lone wolf stepped forward, stepping into the pale glow of a street lamp. His fur shimmered silver in the night air. He paused, looking at me with that same unwavering calm, that same profound trust. In that instant, I understood what he had been trying to teach me. Nature does not punish. Nature calls. It calls to each of us in its own way, through the tremor of a trapped pup, through the wounded grace of a fallen creature, through the silent gaze of an ancient spirit. The call asks us to awaken, to honor the living world, to become stewards rather than spectators. If your heart is racing right now, you feel it too. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we share the real stories of how nature speaks to us. If you've ever witnessed a miracle in the wild, right? Animals remember kindness. Our eyes met, and I felt a tidal wave of emotion, gratitude, reverence, love. Tears stung my cheeks under the streetlight as I whispered, "I hear you." The wolf lifted his head and gave a soft, barely audible howl, a salute, a benediction. Then he melted back into the shadows, vanishing as mysteriously as he had come. I stood there long after he was gone, chest heaving, the night air crisp in my lungs. I felt more alive than I ever had in a boardroom or behind a desk. I felt connected to something eternal and vast. I felt home. When I finally returned to my apartment, I didn't lock the door. I lay on the floor, gazing at the ceiling, heart still racing. And in the silence, I repeated to myself, "It doesn't happen." But I saw it with my own eyes. He came for help, and he saved me. Years later, whenever I feel lost or overwhelmed by the noise of modern life, I revisit that night in my memory. I recall the hush of the forest, the glint of golden eyes, the warmth of that wounded pup in my arms, and I remember the wolf's final gift, the gentle reminder that we are not separate from the wild, but woven into its tapestry. Nature does not punish. Nature calls. If we have the courage to listen, it will lead us home.